Before we begin, subscribe for more chilling stories and tell me which city you're watching from. I'd love to know. The keys felt unnaturally cold in my hand, a stark contrast to the cloying humidity of the late August afternoon in Manchester. My new house, number 14 Elderwood Close, a 2-up, 2-down Victorian terrace that had cost me every penny I had and then some. It stood shoulder to shoulder with identical houses, a brick and slate soldier in a long, weary line. The estate agent had called it characterful. I called it cheap. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of dust, damp, and the faint, sweet smell of decay, like forgotten flowers. I spent the day hauling boxes, my footsteps echoing in the hollow rooms. By the time evening began to bleed purple and orange across the sky, I was knackered. I ordered a curry, ate it sitting on a packing crate in the bare-bones living room, and watched as the first fat drops of rain began to slick the pavement outside. The sound was a comfort at first, a rhythmic drumming on the roof and a gentle patter against the single-glazed sash windows. It was the quintessential sound of a northern English evening. But as the darkness deepened, the house began to speak its own language. A floorboard groaned upstairs, a sound like a weary sigh. The plumbing in the walls gurgled and choked like a dying man. Normal sounds, I told myself. It's an old house, Liam. Houses settle. But the feeling of being watched was harder to dismiss. It was a physical sensation, a prickling on my skin, the kind that makes you turn around suddenly, expecting to see someone standing right behind you. I'd pause mid-unpack, and my eyes would be drawn to the darkest corner of the room, to the top of the unlit staircase, or to the grimy window of the back door, half expecting a face to be peering in. There was nothing, of course, just shadows playing tricks. The rain intensified, lashing against the glass now. I decided to turn in early, dragging a mattress into the front bedroom. The spare room at the back of the house gave me the proper creeps. Its door was fitted with an old, rusted bolt on the outside, and the window overlooked a tangled, overgrown garden belonging to the house behind. I'd deal with that room tomorrow. I locked the front and back doors, checked the windows, and trudged upstairs. Sleep, however, refused to come. Every gust of wind that rattled the window frame sounded like a scrabbling hand. The house continued its symphony of groans and creaks, each one seeming a little more deliberate, a little less random than the last. Then came a new sound, a soft, rhythmic drip. Drip, drip, drip. I'd checked all the taps. I'd even turned the water off at the stopcock before I started unpacking. Annoyed, I grabbed my phone, using its torch to navigate the unfamiliar layout. The dripping was coming from the bathroom. I pushed the door open, the light cutting a swath through the darkness. The tap on the sink was bone dry. The bath taps too. Yet the sound persisted, seeming to come from the very walls. I pressed my ear against the damp, floral wallpaper. Drip, drip, drip. It was louder here, clearer. It was coming from the other side of the wall, from the spare bedroom. My blood ran cold. I retreated to my own room, my heart hammering against my ribs. It's the pipes, just the pipes, you bloody idiot. I lay on the mattress, pulling the duvet up to my chin, staring at the ceiling. Just as my pulse began to return to normal, a different sound cut through the noise of the storm. A clear, sharp, deliberate sound. It was the sound of a single, soft knock, and it came from the inside of the locked spare bedroom door. The following morning dawned gray and miserable, the rain having eased to a persistent, fine drizzle that coated everything in a damp sheen. I felt foolish. A knock, a dripping sound. I was a grown man, spooked by an old house's eccentricities. I chugged a mug of instant coffee, the bitter taste a welcome jolt to my frayed nerves. I had a job to do. I marched upstairs, toolbox in hand, determined to conquer the spare room. The bolt was stiff, coated in layers of old paint and rust. It took a good 10 minutes of jiggling and a liberal application of WD-40 before it finally screeched open. The room inside was just as I'd left it, small, square, and empty, save for a few dust sheets the previous owners had left behind. The window was shut tight. The floorboards were solid beneath my feet. There was no sign of a leak, no explanation for the dripping. I spent the day trying to force a sense of normalcy, unpacking boxes, assembling flat-pack furniture, and blasting the radio to fill the oppressive silence. Yet the feeling of being watched never left. It was a constant, unwelcome companion, a weight on my shoulders. It felt strongest near the spare room, a pocket of cold air that seemed to linger by its doorway no matter how high I cranked the heating. That evening, I made a conscious effort to relax. I ordered a pizza, cracked open a beer, and sat down to watch a film on my laptop. The rain had started up again, a steady, soothing rhythm that I hoped would lull me into a state of calm. But halfway through the film, I noticed it. Sitting on the kitchen counter, next to the sink, was a ceramic mug. It was a cheerful, bright yellow mug, not one of mine. My own mugs were still packed away in a box labeled Kitchen Fragile. I cautiously picked it up. It was clean, but around the rim was a faint pinkish smudge. Lipstick. My heart did a slow, painful lurch. I lived alone. No one had been here. I hadn't even had a visitor since I'd got the keys. I dropped the mug in the bin, my hand shaking. My mind raced, trying to find a rational explanation. A mistake by the movers? Left by the previous owner and I just missed it? But I'd wiped down every single surface myself yesterday. I knew that counter had been empty. Later, as I was brushing my teeth in the bathroom, I heard it. A soft, melodic sound drifting from downstairs. It was a humming tune, a simple, old-fashioned melody. I froze, toothbrush halfway to my mouth. The tune was achingly familiar. It was the lullaby my nan used to hum to me when I was a child, a tune I hadn't heard in 20 years. It was coming from the direction of the living room, a soft, ethereal sound that twisted my childhood memory into something nightmarish. I crept to the top of the stairs, peering down into the murky darkness. The humming stopped abruptly. Silence descended once more, thick and absolute, broken only by the drumming of the rain. I backed away from the stairs, my breath catching in my throat. This wasn't just a house settling. This was something else, something that knew me. As I reached my bedroom door, a floorboard creaked in the spare room next to me. I spun around, staring at the closed door. A moment of silence passed. Then, from the other side, I heard a faint whisper, a perfect imitation of the shaky, terrified breath I had just let out. Sleep was no longer an option. By the third night, I was a wreck, fueled by caffeine and raw fear. I had barricaded my bedroom door with a heavy mahogany chest of drawers I'd found in the spare room. It was a flimsy defense, I knew, but it was a psychological one. It was my space. Everything else belonged to the house, to the thing that was in it with me. The mimicry had become more blatant, more personal. Throughout the day, I'd hear snippets of sound from other rooms. The distinct click of my dad's favorite Zippo lighter. The jingle of the collar belonging to a dog I'd lost years ago. Each sound was a precision strike against my sanity, a calculated piece of psychological torture. I sat on my mattress, back against the wall, clutching a heavy-duty Maglite torch like a club. The rain outside had become a torrential downpour, a violent, angry assault on the house. The wind howled in the chimney, and the windows rattled in their frames. It was the perfect cover for the sounds that had started coming from beyond my door. Soft at first, a gentle scratching, like a cat wanting to be let in. Then the voice started. Liam? It was a whisper, distorted and strange, but it was trying to be my mother's voice. Liam, darling, are you in there? Let me in, love. It's cold out here. Bile rose in my throat. My mom had passed away 5 years ago. Go away, I croaked, my voice barely audible over the storm and the frantic thumping of my own heart. The gentle knocking stopped. A heavy silence fell in the hallway. I held my breath, listening. Then the handle of my bedroom door began to rattle, violently. "Let me in, Liam!" the voice shrieked, no longer a gentle imitation, but a twisted, furious parody. It was my mother's voice, but laced with a venom she had never possessed. "I know you're in there. Open this bloody door." The chest of drawers I'd pushed against the door shuddered as something slammed into it from the other side. Once, twice. A splintering sound echoed in the room. Panic, cold and absolute, seized me. I scrambled for my phone, my fingers fumbling on the screen. I dialed 999. "Police? Which service?" a calm, detached voice asked. "My house," I stammered. "Someone's in my house. They're trying to get into my room." I gave the address, my voice shaking uncontrollably. As I was speaking, the noises outside the door stopped. Complete silence. The operator told me a car was on its way. The 10 minutes it took for them to arrive were the longest of my life. I heard the doorbell, then heavy footsteps downstairs. "Police, open up!" I shoved the drawers aside and ran down, the relief so intense it made me dizzy. 2 bored-looking constables stood on my doorstep. They did a sweep of the house. They found nothing. No forced entry, no one hiding in the cupboards, just me, a pale, trembling mess. "Probably just the wind, mate," one of them said, his tone dripping with condescension. "This old plumbing can make a right racket in a storm." They left, and as I watched their car's red taillights disappear down the rainy street, a soft, childish giggle echoed from the top of the stairs. That was the end. The giggle, so innocent yet so utterly malevolent in that house, broke something inside me. It wasn't just a mimic anymore. It was a predator, and I was its prey. The moment the police car was gone, the assault on my bedroom door resumed, but this time it was different. It was the sound of frantic, desperate sobbing, a perfect imitation of my own terror-filled whimpers from moments before. "Please," the voice outside wept, my own voice thrown back at me. "Please, someone help me. It's in the house." The doorknob, a heavy brass thing, began to turn. Slowly, impossibly. I could see the spindle rotating through the keyhole, a deliberate, mechanical movement that defied the barricade. Adrenaline, pure and undiluted, surged through my veins. I wasn't going to die here. I wasn't going to let it have me. I grabbed the heaviest object I could find, a bedside lamp with a solid ceramic base, and hurled it at the window. The glass didn't just break, it exploded outwards in a shower of glittering shards. The roar of the storm flooded the room, whipping the curtains into a frenzy. Without a second thought, I clambered through the jagged opening, slicing my hands and my leg on the remaining slivers of glass. I didn't feel the pain. I landed heavily on the narrow roof of the bay window below, my feet slipping on the wet tiles. I didn't dare look back into the dark maw of the broken window. I could feel its attention on me, a cold, hungry pressure. I half slid, half fell from the small roof, landing in a heap in the sodden flower bed in my front garden. Mud and rain plastered my face. I scrambled to my feet and ran. I ran without looking back, my bare feet slapping against the slick, cold pavement. Rainwater streamed down my face, mingling with tears of sheer terror. I didn't stop until the streetlights of the main road bathed me in their orange glow, my lungs burning, my body screaming in protest. I never went back. I left everything. My clothes, my laptop, my wallet, my life. I called my dad from a phone box, told him there'd been a fire, that everything was gone. It was easier than the truth. Months later, the house at number 14, Elderwood Close, was back on the market. A young couple, the Millers, were being shown around by a cheerful estate agent. "A few cosmetic issues from the last tenant," the agent explained breezily, gesturing towards the newly glazed window in the master bedroom, left in a bit of a hurry apparently. Mrs. Miller walked into the small spare room at the back of the house. She shivered. gosh, it's chilly in here, isn't it? Her 5-year-old daughter, Chloe, who had followed her in, stood staring intently into the darkest corner of the room. "Mummy," she said, her small voice perfectly clear in the quiet room. "Why is that man crying?" Mrs. Miller looked. She saw nothing but shadows and peeling wallpaper. "Don't be silly, Poppet," she said with a nervous laugh. But the estate agent, standing in the doorway, felt a sudden, inexplicable dread wash over him. The air had dropped several degrees, and the tiny hairs on his arms stood on end. He had the undeniable, gut-wrenching sensation that they were not alone, that they were being watched by something standing right there in the room with them. The flat in Bristol was a steal, or so I'd told myself. A top-floor conversion in a grand old Clifton townhouse, all high ceilings and sash windows that rattled when the wind blew in from the gorge. It was my first proper place alone, a sanctuary I'd meticulously filled with secondhand furniture and potted plants. That first Tuesday, the rain began. It wasn't a dramatic storm, but just a persistent, gray drizzle that slicked the streets and pattered a ceaseless rhythm against the glass. Curled on my worn sofa with a mug of tea, I felt impenetrably safe, cocooned in my little world 4 stories above the glistening tarmac. The first sound was easy to dismiss, a faint creak from the hallway floorboards. The building was ancient. It was bound to have its own language of groans and sighs. I took a sip of tea and turned the page of my book. 10 minutes later, a soft scraping sound came from the kitchen, like a chair leg being dragged an inch across the linoleum. I froze, listening. Silence. Just the rain and the hum of the fridge. I told myself it was the pipes, the heating, anything. I got up, my stockinged feet silent on the rug, and peered into the small kitchen. The single wooden chair was exactly where I'd left it, tucked neatly under the small table. My heart was still thumping a bit too hard. "It's nothing, Maya," I chided myself. "You're just not used to being alone." But the feeling of being watched had begun to prickle at the back of my neck. I left the kitchen light on and returned to the sofa, pulling a blanket tighter around my shoulders. An hour passed. The rain grew heavier, drumming a frantic tattoo on the roof above. That's when I heard the whisper. It was so faint it was almost subliminal, a sibilant hiss woven into the sound of the downpour. I held my breath, straining to hear it again. Was it just the wind funneling through a gap in the window frame? It had to be. But the sound had felt so close, so deliberate. I was about to dismiss it when a heavy art history book, one I'd carefully propped on the mantelpiece that morning, suddenly toppled over, landing on the hearth with a sickening thud that made me yelp. My eyes darted to the fireplace. The book lay spine up on the cold tiles. There was no draft, no vibration that could have dislodged it. It was a solid, heavy object that had been perfectly stable. A cold dread, far deeper and more chilling than the autumnal air, began to seep into the room. The flat no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a cage I had willingly locked myself inside. I sat rigid on the sofa, too scared to move, every nerve ending screaming. The rain lashed against the windows, and from the darkest corner of the living room, a sound threaded its way through the noise of the storm. A sound that was clear, unmistakable, and utterly impossible. A dry, rasping whisper, right beside my ear. Maya. Sleep offered no escape. I spent the night on the sofa, a single lamp burning a small circle of light in the oppressive darkness, my ears straining at every creak and groan of the old house. By morning, the rain had subsided to a miserable drizzle, and in the harsh light of day, my fear felt almost foolish. It was an old building. Things fell. The whisper was just my imagination, overstimulated by the storm. I forced myself through a normal routine: shower, coffee, a phone call to my friend Emily. "You're just getting spooked by the new place," she'd said, her voice a comforting dose of logic through the phone. "Give it a week. You'll be used to all its little quirks." I wanted to believe her. I truly did. But I couldn't shake the memory of that voice, the way it had pronounced my name with a dry, dusty familiarity. That evening, the fear returned with the dusk. I triple-checked all the locks, but the feeling of being watched was more intense than ever. I was making a simple dinner when I realized my house keys weren't in the ceramic bowl by the door where I always, without fail, left them. A frantic search ensued. I checked my coat pockets, my handbag, the kitchen counter. Nothing. Giving up, I turned back to the hob, and my blood ran cold. The keys were there, sitting right in the middle of the living room rug, arranged in a perfect, neat line. I hadn't been in that room for over an hour. My breath hitched in my throat. This wasn't a quirk. This wasn't my imagination. Something was deliberately toying with me. Later, as I sat numbly trying to watch television, the whispers started again. They weren't clear words this time, just fragments, hushed and layered, coming from the walls themselves. It sounded like a conversation happening in a distant room, the murmurs rising and falling, a constant, unnerving presence. I turned the volume up, but I could still hear them, a maddening undercurrent of sound. I was losing my mind. The final straw came just before midnight. I'd worked up the courage to go to the bathroom at the end of the long, narrow hallway. As I washed my hands, my eyes flickered to the reflection in the mirror. For a single, heart-stopping second, I saw it. Standing in the hallway behind me, framed in the bathroom doorway, was a silhouette. It was impossibly tall and thin, a stark black cutout against the dim light with no discernible features. I spun around, a scream catching in my throat. The hallway was empty, but I'd seen it. I knew I had. Shaking uncontrollably, I stumbled back into the relative safety of the living room and slammed the door. And there, in the very center of the room where my keys had been, was a single, wet, muddy footprint. It was large, misshapen, and utterly impossible. The windows were locked, the front door chained. No one had come in. But the proof was there, glistening on my rug. I was not alone. The next 2 days were a blur of sleeplessness and escalating terror. I barely ate. I left every light in the flat burning, day and night, a futile attempt to chase away the shadows that now seemed to congregate in every corner. The whispers were constant, a low, sibilant monologue that I couldn't understand but felt in my bones. I called Emily again, my voice trembling, and told her about the footprint. She paused, the silence on the line stretching for an eternity before she urged me to stay with her. But a strange, horrifying paralysis had taken hold of me. I felt tethered to the flat, as if leaving was an impossibility. It wanted me here. I had to know why. My fear gave way to a desperate, frantic need for answers. Who lived here before me? What happened in these rooms? A quick search online for the building's address brought up little, just old property listings. But a deeper dive into Bristol's local history archives gave me a name: a Mr. Abernathy, the flat's tenant for over 30 years. The record stated he had died, but an old local news clipping I found from a decade ago told a different story. He hadn't died, he'd vanished. Neighbors were quoted as saying he'd become increasingly reclusive in his final months, a strange man who they often heard talking animatedly to himself late at night. They spoke of strange smells and a constant feeling of being watched from his windows. The whispers in my flat suddenly took on a new, terrifying context. They weren't just random sounds, they were an echo. "Can't let them find it." The phrase repeated itself from the corner by the bookshelf, clearer than ever before. Find what? I started searching the flat like a woman possessed, tapping walls, checking for hollow spaces, driven by an instinct I didn't understand. The floorboards in the hallway, the ones that had creaked on that first night, drew my attention. One particular board, tucked away beneath a runner rug, felt slightly loose under my foot. My fingers trembled as I worked them into the crack, the wood old and splintered. It took all my strength, but I finally managed to pry it up. A wave of musty, cloying air, thick with the smell of decay and dust, washed over me. I peered into the dark void between the joists. There, nestled in the darkness and covered in a thick layer of cobwebs, was a small object wrapped in oilcloth. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the flat. The whispers had stopped. The air was unnaturally still, heavy with anticipation, as if the entire building was holding its breath. With a shaking hand, I reached down into the cold, dark space and pulled out the package. The oilcloth was stiff and cracked with age. As I unwrapped it on the living room floor, my fingers brushed against worn, brittle leather. It was a diary. The name Elias Abernathy was embossed on the cover in faded gold leaf. A chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature snaked up my spine. This was it. This was what the presence wanted, or what it didn't want me to find. With trembling hands, I opened it. The first entries were mundane, detailing Mr. Abernathy's quiet life as a retired archivist. But his tone began to shift. He wrote of a shadow he'd glimpsed at the edge of his vision, a tall companion that began to visit him in his solitude. At first, he seemed intrigued, believing it to be a figment of his lonely mind. But then, the shadow started communicating. It promises things, he wrote in a shaky script. Knowledge, an end to being forgotten. It only asks to be let in, to have a place to stay. The entries grew more erratic. He described moving objects, whispers in the dark, the very same phenomena I was experiencing. He realized it wasn't a spirit, but something else, something that fed on attention and solitude. He had let it in, and now he couldn't get it out. The final pages were almost illegible scrawls, filled with stark terror. It's inside with me now, always watching. It wants the book. It knows I wrote it all down. It can't let anyone else know, can't let them find it. As I read the last desperate word, the temperature in the room plummeted. The single lamp on the table flickered violently, then died, plunging me into near darkness, illuminated only by the faint glow of the streetlights outside. An intense cold spot formed at the end of the hallway. The air warped and shimmered, and from it the silhouette coalesced. It was taller than I remembered, a towering column of pure black that seemed to drink the light from the room. It had no face, no features, but I felt its attention fix on the diary in my hands with an immense, ancient hunger. It wasn't Mr. Abernathy. It was the thing he had invited into his home. It began to glide towards me, silent and inexorable, its form rippling. It didn't want me. It wanted to erase its own story. Instinct took over. I scrambled backwards, grabbed the diary, and hurled it towards the fireplace. It landed in the grate with a soft thud. The figure let out a low, guttural hiss, a sound of pure fury, and surged forward. Fumbling for the box of matches on the mantelpiece, my fingers closing around it just as a chilling cold touched my back. I struck a match, the flame sputtering to life. With a desperate sob, I tossed it into the hearth. The dry, brittle pages of the diary caught instantly. As the flames consumed the book, the figure let out a shriek that was not human, a sound of tearing fabric and howling wind that vibrated through my bones. Its form flickered and dissolved like smoke in a gale. I didn't wait to see if it was gone for good. I grabbed my keys, my phone, and I ran. I fled the flat, not even bothering to close the door, and burst out into the lashing rain of the Bristol night, gulping in the cold, wet air. I didn't look back, knowing with chilling certainty that I hadn't destroyed it. I had only destroyed its anchor, and merely bought myself some time. The house in York was a creature of groans and sighs. An old Georgian townhouse inherited from a great aunt I'd barely known, its bones settled with the weary complaints of age. For months, I, Arthur Finch, had lived within its lower floors, treating the attic as a problem for another day. That day finally arrived on a Tuesday, under a sky the color of a day-old bruise. The air was thick and heavy, promising a torrent. It seemed a fittingly grim day to face the accumulated history of strangers. Armed with a torch and a sense of grim duty, I pulled down the rickety ladder and ascended into the dusty dark. The attic was a graveyard of forgotten things, stacks of yellowed newspapers, furniture draped in white sheets like slumbering ghosts, and the cloying sense of dust and decay. In the furthest corner, tucked beneath the eaves, sat a large, sea-worn trunk bound with iron straps. It wasn't locked, but sealed by time and rust. With a grunt of effort, I forced the clasps open. The lid creaked upwards, releasing a musty breath of cedar and something else, something faintly sweet, like dried flowers. Inside, nestled in decaying velvet, were marionettes. 6 of them, each nearly 3 feet tall, carved from a pale, smooth wood. Their clothes were exquisitely tailored Victorian garb, but it was their faces that stole the air from my lungs. They were utterly blank. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just a polished, ovoid smoothness that seemed to drink the light from my torch beam. They were profoundly, unnervingly wrong. Beneath them, my fingers brushed against the cool leather of a book, a diary. The embossed name on the cover read Silas Blackwood. I felt a tremor of unease, a cold finger tracing its way down my spine that had nothing to do with the attic's chill. The first fat drop of rain hit the skylight above with a startling crack, followed by another, and then a cascade. The storm had broken. I decided the rest of the attic could wait. I couldn't leave them up here, though. It felt disrespectful. I carefully lifted one of the puppets, a male figure in a tiny tweed suit, and carried it down the ladder, along with the diary. I set the marionette in an old wingback chair in my study, its jointed limbs folding into a disturbingly natural posture. It sat there, headless face, angled slightly towards me as the rain began to lash against the window panes. I opened the diary. The ink was faded, but the script was elegant, precise. The first entry was dated 1888. It read, "The vessels are complete. 6 perfect, empty forms. They lack only the final, essential component. They lack a story." A roll of thunder shook the old house, and in the flickering light of my desk lamp, I could have sworn the marionette in the chair shifted its weight. The rain was relentless, a percussive drumming on the roof that seemed to synchronize with the frantic beat of my own heart. I spent hours lost in Silas Blackwood's diary, each page pulling me deeper into a world of obsession and madness. He wasn't just a puppeteer, he saw himself as a pioneer of a new art form, a strange and terrible alchemy. He wrote of capturing echoes and imbuing wood with memory. He believed that a human soul at the moment of extreme duress could be siphoned, imprinted onto an object, a vessel. His blank-faced marionettes. He described late-night rituals, strange incantations whispered over the wooden forms, and his belief that he could grant them a form of life, not of movement, but of presence. "They watch," he wrote in a spidery, frantic hand. "Even without eyes, they see. They absorb the life of a room, the secrets whispered in the dark. They are becoming more than wood. They are becoming witnesses." I slammed the book shut, a cold sweat breaking out on my brow. This was the rambling of a lunatic, yet I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. My gaze kept flicking to the wingback chair. The marionette sat exactly as I had left it, a silent wooden sentinel in the gloom. Or had it? Was its head not tilted a fraction more to the left? Were its wooden fingers, previously curled loosely, not now slightly tensed, as if gripping an invisible object? I told myself it was a trick of the light, the effect of the storm raging outside, and the morbid prose I'd been consuming. I stood up, stretching my stiff limbs, and went to the kitchen to make tea, deliberately keeping my back to the study. As the kettle began to whistle, a sound from above cut through the noise of the storm. A soft, distinct scrape. It came from the attic. My blood ran cold. It was probably just a draft, a box shifting as the old house settled under the assault of the wind and rain. It had to be. But Silas's words echoed in my mind. The vessels are complete. 6 of them. I had only brought 1 down. 5 remained in the trunk. I returned to the study, tea forgotten, my eyes immediately locking onto the puppet. In the split second I'd been gone, its right leg, which had been crossed over its left, was now resting on the floor. It was a small change, an impossible one, yet utterly undeniable. The featureless face seemed to mock my terror, its smooth surface reflecting the wavering lamplight like a dark, placid pool. The scraping sound came again from the attic, louder this time. A slow, deliberate drag, like a heavy wooden box being pulled across the floorboards right above my head. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. The sounds from the attic were no longer ambiguous. It was the distinct, horrifying clatter of wood on wood, a dry, skeletal rhythm that echoed the frantic pounding in my chest. It sounded like a clumsy dance, a puppet show with no audience, playing out in the dark above. Silas's words about imbuing them with presence felt like a grotesque understatement. He had done more. He had woken them up. My first instinct was to flee, to abandon the house to its wooden inhabitants and the ghost of their creator. But a strange, paralytic fear held me fast. This was my house, my inheritance, my problem. With a surge of adrenaline-fueled resolve, I shoved a heavy bookcase against the attic hatch in the hallway, creating a crude barricade. It wouldn't hold forever, but it was all I could think to do. The dragging and clattering from above ceased abruptly, as if the things up there knew what I had done. The silence that followed was somehow more terrifying. The storm outside continued its assault, rattling the window frames as if demanding entry. I retreated to the study, my eyes fixed on the marionette in the chair. It was no longer just a puppet. It was the ambassador of the horror upstairs. I had to get rid of it. I grabbed the poker from the fireplace, its weight cold and solid in my trembling hand. I would smash it, burn it, reduce it to splinters and ash. I advanced on the chair, the poker raised. As I drew closer, a powerful, inexplicable wave of nausea and sorrow washed over me. The smooth, featureless face seemed to express a profound melancholy. The thought of striking it felt like an act of unspeakable violence, like harming a child. My arm refused to obey, the poker suddenly feeling impossibly heavy. It was then that I felt it, a faint, silken tugging at my fingers, my wrists, my neck, and phantom sensation like being ensnared in invisible strings. The puppet wasn't moving, yet I felt controlled by it, my will draining away, replaced by a cold, hollow imperative to protect it. I dropped the poker with a clang. Backing away, I stumbled over to the desk and snatched up the diary, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the pages. I had to understand. I found a chapter near the end titled The Watcher. Silas wrote that one of the 6 was his masterpiece. It was not just a vessel, but a conduit. The Watcher does not need my strings, he wrote. It will find its own puppeteer. It will bind him, guide him, and through him, my children will finally walk. The keeper becomes the kept. The master becomes the instrument. My blood turned to ice. I looked at the puppet in the tweed suit, the Watcher. The invisible strings tightened their grip, and I felt a horrifying sense of surrender. A sharp, loud crack echoed from the hallway. The bookcase by the attic hatch had splintered. The storm had passed. Dawn broke, gray and weeping, the light filtering weakly through the rain-streaked windows of the study. An eerie quiet had fallen over the house, a stillness that felt heavier and more profound than the preceding night's chaos. The barricade was broken, The attic hatch hanging open, a dark maw leading to the secrets above. Yet, nothing had come down. I hadn't slept. I'd spent the night huddled at my desk, the diary open before me, the watcher sitting in its chair, a silent, patient observer. The feeling of its invisible strings had faded to a dull, constant pressure, a background hum in my own consciousness. I knew I couldn't leave. The compulsion to stay, to protect it, was now an inseparable part of me. There was only one page left in the diary. The final entry was short, the handwriting almost illegible. My time is done. The transfer is nearly complete. I feel my will dissolving into the wood, my thoughts no longer my own. I have become the first string on the instrument. Soon he will need a new puppeteer to hold him, and the watcher will find one. It is a beautiful, terrible legacy. The show must go on. Silas Blackwood hadn't just animated his puppets. He had poured himself into one of them, making himself the eternal, captive soul of his own creation. The ritual wasn't about giving them life. It was about ensuring their performance would never end, passed from one unwilling puppeteer to the next. I was the next. I closed the diary. For the last time. A soft creak came from the top of the stairs. I didn't flinch. I felt no fear, only a hollow sense of inevitability. Slowly, deliberately, a small wooden foot appeared on the top step, then another. One by one, Silas's other children began their descent. A girl in a faded calico dress, a boy in a sailor suit, 3 other figures, all with the same horribly blank, polished faces. There were no strings attached to their limbs. They moved with a jerky, unnatural grace, guided by a will that was now inexorably entwined with my own. They filed into the study, arranging themselves in a silent semicircle around the wingback chair, their featureless faces all turned towards me. The watcher sat placidly, its work complete. I felt a final, gentle tug, an invitation. I rose from my desk, crossed the room, and sat down in the large armchair opposite. The watcher slid from its perch and, with a series of quiet clicks, climbed onto my lap, its wooden body surprisingly heavy. It settled against my chest, and one of its smooth, carved hands came to rest on mine. I looked at my silent, waiting family, the dawn light glinting off their vacant faces. I was their keeper. I was their prisoner. The performance was about to begin.